David Friedman said last night that the United States has, quote, thrown more than $10 billion worth of aid to the Palestinians, but that spending has brought the region no closer to peace or stability. In an address explaining why U.S. President Donald Trump thought it was important to halt U.S. funding to UNRWA, the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. I'll start with you, Vivian. Is that the way success in diplomacy should be gauged, by how much money was given to a certain party?
It's one metric. I mean, if you're investing in something, you obviously are doing it. That's what diplomacy is about. That's what foreign policy and foreign aid is about. You put your money into a particular venture because you want to support a certain
and you want to get
outcome.
Bang for your buck.
Absolutely. So, you know, it's not a quid pro quo the way it might be in the private sector, but it's absolutely one metric that you look at.
So, Debra, I mean, don't American taxpayers feel, especially as the Palestinians are now snubbing the Trump administration, not talking to them at all, they're not getting any bang for their buck. So, you know, it's right for them to play hardball.
3 points about this, Ami. First point is that the sole purpose of the United States giving this aid to the Palestinians was not to create peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Making that sort of critique, Friedman easily could have said, although of course he would never say, that the United States has given far more, 10 or 20, 30 times that aid to Israel, and it hasn't brought peace. Second point to make is that there has been progress, and it's completely disingenuous of Friedman to say that there hasn't been any. We've had the establishment of Palestinian institutions, state institutions, which are a valuable step in the establishment of a two-state solution, if you actually wanted to do that, which of course Friedman has no interest in doing, and and of course security cooperation with Israel, which is something that Israel's security chiefs deeply value. And the last thing I want to say is that it's just humorous to listen to someone like David Friedman talk about peace. This is someone who, in his long private life before he became ambassador and since he's become ambassador, has showed absolutely no interest in peace whatsoever, but rather an interest in entrenching Israel's settlement enterprise and making sure that a two-state solution would never be possible.
Yeah, well, it's funnier to hear Peace Now talk about peace, because it was been now. It was actually, I remember it in my living room when they founded Peace Now. These were my parents' friends. And this is a ridiculous, now we know that it's been a ridiculous enterprise. And so I think, you know, the Palestinians have been the child that throws tantrums, and everyone always has to respond to these tantrums. Come in the Trump administration, and for the first time they made them realize that they have something to lose whenever they reject a deal. So whenever you reject a deal, you get a worse deal. They've been getting used to the idea for 20 years that whenever they reject a deal, we need to come up with a better deal. No, we won't.
Well, I want to stick with the topic about the complete halt of the funding, Vivian. I mean, even the Israeli security establishment has warned about cutting funds to UNRWA, and here Trump is completely halting the transfer.
Well,
is this not, you know, playing with fire?
Yes and no. Look, even Dan Shapiro and I were both in office at the same time.
The former U.S. ambassador
to Israel. And this was an issue that we dealt with and spoke about with our own foreign offices and with one another. I certainly had many discussions with the Europeans. At that time, Stephen Harper pulled all funding for 10 years. He stopped funding UNRWA.
Not the same amount, of course.
No, not near the same amount.
Near the same amount.
But it was very important. I mean, it was probably $30–40 million, maybe 60 at its peak.
Compared to 260 we're talking about.
Okay, but, you know, 10th of the population, smaller GDP, all that. So, but what's important is he said, in principle, this is not a responsible, not an accountable organization. He determined
it's much worse.
I know. He determined that the raison d'etre of UNRWA, the reason that it exists, is to promote the right of return of all refugees and this perpetual, as we know, grandfathering of refugees. Exactly.
Right.
Which doesn't apply to anyone else.
Okay.
So you know, it's like, you lost me. You lost me. We're having technical difficulties.
UNRWA, it was created to perpetuate the refugee problem.
That's exactly what I want to...
There's no such thing as refugee status that is passed on from generation to generation.
Exactly.
People who have citizenship are still registered as refugees. So UNRWA is a stumbling block, because if you look at the psychology of the Palestinians, they're not going to reconstruct Gaza because UNRWA is teaching them that Gaza is not their home. Their home is in Israel, and therefore they should not make this temporary camp called Gaza their home. So as long as money is funneled through UNRWA, it will all go to war.
So Debra, I want to just finish that
quickly.
Very quickly, okay? in terms of, will it be chaos? Privately, in my experience, in Dan's experience, and I think in many people in the diplomatic world's experience, people are confused. Even the Israeli left, in the diplomacy, in IDF, because they've kind of allowed themselves to go through this exercise of the UNRWA funding and supporting UNRWA year over year.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, we're at the edge of a cliff. What's going to happen when we go off? We actually may be able to reform the organization and imbue it with a level of responsibility.
Debra, why do the Palestinians need their own agency when every other refugee around the world is handled by the other agency of the UN, the UNHCR?
It's a historical artifact of the fact that that UNRWA was created in 1949 before the UNHCR was created in 1951, and the UN General Assembly has decided to maintain UNRWA. It is not in any way designed to perpetuate the Palestinian refugee.
No, you are kidding. You are kidding. No, we could not venture so. I'm sorry. We could not venture. We could not venture so far from reality.
That would end this status of refugees, of Palestinians, and their perpetual refugee status. Only a two-state solution agreed upon by Israel and the Palestinians will do that. It is not UNRWA that is perpetuating this problem. It's a complete myth. And by the way, as we talked about last week, the UNHCR maintains the same definition of Palestinian refugees as UNRWA does, and we see complete misinformation from the Trump administration and from Gaid on this issue.
There was just a book out recently by Nat Wilson and Adi Schwartz, which is a very thorough research on UNRWA. There are about a few tens of thousands of real refugees. There's no other status in the world. No one else passes refugee status from father to son.
Untrue.
There is no such thing ever.
Untrue.
UNRWA was created in order not to let the refugee problem be solved. This is why UNRWA was created, and as long as it's here, and this is you're misleading the viewers. Debra, you're misleading the viewers when you're saying that the refugees. When you're saying that the refugees.
Otherwise, it would be responsible to take care of the occupation.
20 seconds, Gaid. 20 seconds.
It's misleading the viewers saying that the refugees, according to UNRWA, will return to the Palestinian state. UNRWA holds inside its refugee camps. They are divided by geographical areas in Israel, and it promises them a home in Israel, not in Palestine. This is why UNRWA is a stumbling block.